Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, your place for all your filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you filthy casual sports fans out there like you and me. I am your host, Dylan Lasagna, and this is episode number 279. And in this episode, we're here to wrap up, to put a bow on our 2025 NFL season team preview month. Man, what a journey it has been, covering all 32 teams in the National Football League and covering 8 divisions. Well, we've covered 7 so far. We've covered 28 teams up to this point. Now it's time to talk about the final 4 here in this episode in part 8 and the final part. Down to the final 4, and that final 4 resides in the East. In not just any East, as we're still here, but this East is a specific one, the NFC East. So, we're here to wrap up all things NFL 2025 previews. And man, what a journey it's been. Like, it's gone by so fast. It really has gone by so fast. I know I'm repeating myself, but I feel like we just started this like a week ago. Literally. It feels like a week ago, and now here we are. This episode as we're on the beginning of training camp, which we'll get into, by the way. But I just want to thank you all for that has listened out there or watched this, and you got a sense of feeling out of it, and hopefully you'll give your opinions on whether it's the NFC West, the AFC West, the AFC North, the NFC North, and all the divisions, all the teams that we talked about in our team preview month as we are officially on the road to the 2025 NFL season that continues to intensify, continues to increase as we get even closer and closer to said season in early September. So, in case you haven't heard or watched any of my team previews, my filthy casual team previews, go listen to those episodes after this one, and continue to support Very Cold Lasagna, whether it's on YouTube or Apple Podcasts. So before we get into the final set of teams at hand in our team preview month, let's give you a little bit of training camp updates. So all the teams have reported to training camp this past week, and there hasn't been too many updates since it just started, but there have been some notable developments in just the first day or 2 and 3. So probably one of the most notable developments that has happened so far is Tyrann Mathieu, the safety for the New Orleans Saints. Out of nowhere, out of the blue, on a late July day, he announced his retirement from the NFL. Call it coincidence? Call it surprising? I don't know what you want to call it, but this is another stunner for the New Orleans Saints. First, it was Derek Carr that announced his surprise retirement in May, and now here's Tyrann Mathieu, just out of the blue, calling for his retirement, like on the eve, or maybe it was like at the start of training camp. But it's crazy. It's crazy what's going on in New Orleans right now, and I don't know. I'm not sure what triggered it. Maybe he just wanted to, follow the career. But again, it might be coincidence. But best of luck to whatever's next for him. And he had a pretty good career, whether it's with the Chiefs or with the Saints. So, best of luck to whatever's next for Tyrann Mathieu. So the Saints had to respond accordingly. They had to respond fast. So what they had to do was sign a former Colts safety in Julian Blackmon. And I'm surprised he was still on the market, by the way, up to this point. I'm surprised nobody signed him for whatever reason. Not even the Colts wanted to re-sign him. So, he's back on. Well, he was on the market, and now he's on the team. He's finally on the team. That's being Julian Blackmon. So they replaced Tyrann Mathieu with Julian Blackmon, and well, that kind of solves their problem depending on how he does. So unfortunately, with some injury news that comes with the Miami Dolphins, they took another significant hit in the secondary for the worse, because on day 1 of camp, already in training camp, corner Artie Burns might have torn his ACL. And if it's confirmed that he torn his ACL, oh boy. That Dolphins secondary that already lost Jalen Ramsey, and we're not sure what we're going to get out of Minkah Fitzpatrick in the deep end of that secondary. But that corner spot, though, not looking good for Miami. Not good at all. That secondary is, it's like I said when I previewed them in the last episode, it's going to get real ugly. There are still some holdouts happening throughout camp, even though it's been a couple of days, but it's carried over from the last 2 months or so. From the likes of Terry McLaurin in Washington, James Cook in Buffalo, Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart in Cincinnati, among various others. They did not report for the start of their training camps as they continue to hold out for contract extensions. They want that ducats. They want that money going into the next season. How much money? I don't know. One of the lone exceptions, though, was 49er receiver Juwan Jennings. He was a good boy. He reported to the 49ers' first practice of training camp this past Wednesday. And yeah, despite wanting a contract extension, despite his late request for one, he at least reported to training camp. He is at least practicing with Brock Purdy and the boys. So that's good for Juwan Jennings. At least he is at least wanting to practice. So that's good. That's a real good move for him. And then last but not least, there was, I wanted to throw that out there. An interesting thing that I saw on Twitter, or as the cool people like to say nowadays, even though it's not so cool, X, the quarterback competition in Indianapolis. It's going to get really interesting this season, but it got off to a really interesting start for the wrong reasons. Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, they turned the ball over at least once during their little battle in training camp. And I believe it was either Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones. They also almost threw another interception. Yeah, what a great way to start this training camp and this quarterback competition in general. So, yeah, fun times for Colts fans as this season's about to get real interesting. And who knows? Who knows? Maybe this is an early prediction, an early spoiler. Maybe the Texans, as if they don't get their own voodoo, they might just have an even tighter grasp on the AFC South. So anyway, moving along from talking about training camp, let's talk about these final four teams, or get along to our final part of our 2025 NFL season team preview month, looking at the NFC East, probably a really good way to cap off our season team preview month with the NFC East, a rather interesting set of teams, with the exception of one or two, I'd say at least, but they still have an interesting case study. And that starts off with the big blue, the big blue set in the Meadowlands as they get ready for the first ever 2-night SummerSlam next week, which, again, like I said, with the New York Jets, which are not getting any representation in this 2-night SummerSlam, it doesn't deserve a 2-night SummerSlam, to be honest with you. I still don't know why they're doing it. But nonetheless, to not further drag things along, let's talk about the New York Giants. So the Giants, they celebrated 100 seasons last year with another one of the worst on-field products displayed, and some drama surrounding the release of mistake-prone Daniel Jones, all of which led to an abysmal 3-14 record and leaving them in shambles, with them admitting giving Daniel Jones the mistake of giving him a big fat contract 2 off seasons ago over Saquon Barkley. Yeah, they made that mistake. That was a big fat mistake. So all of that, and as well as releasing Daniel Jones mid-season last year, yeah, it was really ugly. It was really, really ugly. And somehow, some way, the reward for Giants fans and even Jets fans was giving them all a 2-night SummerSlam before the eve of their first preseason game. Yeah, a mid 2-night SummerSlam, by the way. But that's just my opinion. So to further talk away from the 2-night SummerSlam crap, the Giants were in a not so interesting position because this team was a mess. Because when you look at this past offseason and what they needed to do, they needed to find a long-term quarterback solution, which obviously was the biggest need of all. The only problem was at the time was that the Tennessee Titans and the Cleveland Browns have the power to choose both the top two quarterbacks over them. So they were stuck at number 3. And if at that time, the Titans and the Browns chose the quarterbacks that they wanted, then the Giants were pretty much stuck with, well, the best player available or no quarterback at all. So some other things that the Giants had to fix this past offseason was fixing the damn offensive line. They haven't gotten the chance to do so or neglected to do so in the last few seasons. Like general manager Joe Chosen and head coach Brian Dable, as well as the owner John Mara, they needed to build a competent offensive line, especially in the interior. Because if their quarterback wanted to stay alive for at least half a season, and an offensive line that pretty much sent Daniel Jones to the curb, well, it started with the offensive line. They also need depth at receiver and running back because Malik Neighbors is a really good receiver, just doesn't have a quarterback. And he doesn't have much else behind him. And then Tyrone Tracy, as a rookie, he was a nice gem. But again, none of them have quality depth behind them. So looking at some of the things that happened for the New York Giants this past offseason, whether it was key events, key moves in free agency in the draft, not really much happened in terms of, re-signing players. It was just like scrubs. And of course, getting that 2-night SummerSlam, which is pretty much all New York Giants favoritism, by the way. Like, come on, where's the Jets? Like, seriously. But anyway, looking at some of the moves that the Giants made in free agency, the only notable loss for the Giants was losing Adoree Jackson. That's the one thing that the Giants really need to re-sign, and they let him go. So the additions, though, were pretty notable. They did at least offset that loss with Paulson Adebo from New Orleans. He was the silver lining for New Orleans' defense. They also got Javon Holland from the Miami Dolphins. And what was very interesting was getting quarterbacks. Yeah, I said quarterbacks. And it was the quality of quarterbacks. First, they got Jameis Winston, and then they got Russell Wilson. Why? I guess it had to do with them dropping down to the 3rd overall pick and winning a meaningless game in Week 17 against the Colts. So perhaps that's why they made that move. So in correspondence to dropping all the way down to the number 3 overall pick, that's where the draft comes in. Because they used the 3rd overall pick on edge rusher Abdul Carter from Penn State. But don't get me wrong, at least they get some help in the pass rush, because Abdul Carter is going to be big help to Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeau, who hopefully will have a bounce back year. But then they traded back up to the 1st round to get their quarterback, hopefully of the future, and that's going to be Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. So that was an interesting move, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to my later question, how much time he's going to get this year. So some of the other moves that they made was getting another defensive tackle in Darius Alexander to help out with the pass rush. And probably one of the more interesting moves was getting a running back in Cam Scabito from Arizona State. I know he was talked about a lot during the pre-draft process, but that's gonna be an interesting move, and hopefully he'll be a nice finally replacement for Saquon that the Giants have been desperately looking for. So looking at this Giants offseason, the pass rush rotation should again be the saving grace for this defense. I kind of like what the Giants did, because Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns, as well as Kayvon Thibodeau, got some much needed help with these additions of Chauncey Golston, and then drafting the very talented Abdul Carter. So those four should form a nice foursome. And then, like I said, hope for a rebound year from Kayvon Thibodeau. And that secondary, while it still has some concerns, they got some decent additions in Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland. Going back to Cam Scabito at running back, he he could be a nice X factor depending on his development. So he has some very nice strengths, like his ability to shake off and power through run defenders. He's gonna have to prove in training camp and preseason though that he can overtake Tyrone Tracy for that starting role. So we'll see what happens in training camp and going into the preseason. Can he take that starting role away from Tracy Jr.? So a team like the Giants, you're not gonna make the playoffs unless barring some crazy surprise. But yeah, this Giants team, it's very flawed. It's gonna suck, just like this 2-night format that's SummerSlam, barring the match card and all. But just like with this 2-night SummerSlam, this New York Giants team, your goal for 2025 is to try to find the silver linings going into next season. So looking at some of the key games for this season for the Giants, it's for a team like this, your first 4 weeks are your biggest impressions. Starting off with weeks 1 and 2, you start on the road, going to Washington to take on the Commanders and going to Dallas to take on the Cowboys. So that's 2 division games right out of the gate. And then you come home for a gauntlet. You take on the AFC West. 2 big AFC West teams, mind you. The Chiefs in prime time for whatever godforsaken reason on Sunday night. And then you take on the Chargers the following week. Yeah, what a slate. What a slate to start off the season. Yeah. You can either steal one or go 0-4. So my question and concerns for the Giants going into this upcoming season is, well, mainly concerned around Jackson Dart. How long is it going to take for Jackson Dart to, well, start? That was a terrible pun, but anyway. I mean, when you look at the quarterback room, Russell Wilson, past his prime, but I say he should at least be able to hold down the fort until he falls apart midway, or at least most of the way through the season. And then you look at Jameis Winston, he's kind of reliable, but not that much reliable due to his turnover frequency and his spray and pray turnovers. But I say he's still a decent backup to have. But yeah, the Giants do at least have to get a look at Jackson Dart because they did draft him as a first-round pick before the season is over. So I give and take probably all of December that you get to see Jackson Dart if you're a Giants fan. So the other thing I have to wonder is whether or not is Brian Daboll going to get the shoe, or the shaft, as I like to say it, and is Brian Daboll and Joe Shozen going to be done after the season? Because this duo made some nice offseason decisions this past year, as well as the draft, but the on-field results have failed to translate. So yeah, they made some nice moves, but where's the execution? Most fans thought it would have been it for at least Daboll last year, but this year could be it when John Mara pulls the plug. If Daboll doesn't coach at least something promising, at least something watchable for this big blue team. So these Giants, they're going to remain a mess for at least this season and probably next. And yeah, unless something miraculous happens, it's going to hold up. Especially that offensive line. If that can hold up and Jackson Dart starts, and so maybe he surprises sooner than expected. Well, if neither hold up true, then the only thing big blue fans on that side of the Meadowlands, the only thing they can look forward to is, that 2-night SummerSlam that absolutely has no right to be 2 nights next weekend. So moving on from the big blue side of the Meadowlands, we head down to Jerry's world, everybody's favorite world, pal, to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. And how about that Cowboys? Yeehaw! So the Dallas Cowboys, what a season they had last year. And boy, did it fall off the rails real fast midway through. So Dallas, they struggled with injuries and just struggled in general early in the year. And all of that worsened when Dak Prescott suffered a season-ending hamstring injury in Atlanta. And while they still managed to keep themselves in playoff contention, throughout the year, they eventually crumbled in the end 2 weeks before the season ended, and as they lost in Philadelphia hard, and then they were eliminated from playoff contention and finished the year 7-10. So, yeah, this was a pretty rough season for the Dallas Cowboys. So you were kind of wondering what was going to happen for this team because they were kind of in a bind. We really didn't know what to do, giving that you were kind of just a middling squad. But looking at what the Cowboys had to do this past offseason in order to kind of get past being a middling squad and hopefully do more than just a divisional playoff appearance for the first time in over 30 years, well, you got to get some help for CeeDee Lamb because over time, in the last 2 years or so, the receiver depth has worsened and worsened, and they needed a solution with Brandon Cooks being a free agent. And even then, Brandon Cooks didn't provide much of a solution in the last year. They also needed a top running back because for whatever reason, Jerry Jones skipped out on Derrick Henry when he had the chance to, and his team had been paying the price for it. And with Rico Dowdle being a free agent this past offseason, he needed to address that in the draft. And even then, Rico Dowdle didn't make much of a difference either. They also needed to refresh the offensive line. Dak Prescott got hurt because some of his offensive line struggled. I talked about that in last year's team preview where the offensive line was going to have to adjust, and, well, they didn't really do much in the season. So you also had to consider starting guard Zach Martin. He teased retirement while tackle Tyler Guyton struggled as a rookie. So Jerry had to bring in some depth at both of their respective spots in order for this offensive line to really gel together. So looking at some of the things that happened for the Cowboys this past offseason, whether it was notable events, free agency, or the draft, there was talk about whether or not Mike McCarthy was going to come back. And yeah, he did not come back because his contract expired. Jerry Jones, he let him go, and yeah, they just parted ways. Now came the question of, well, who's going to be the next coach for the Dallas Cowboys? And this is probably one of the bigger surprises of the offseason. And who Jerry Jones picked was his offensive coordinator, Brian Schottenheimer, as his new head coach. It was a surprise to many at the time because Jerry Jones had interviewed him, Kellen Moore, Robert Saleh, Leslie Frazier, and among others. And Schottenheimer, out of all the bunch, was the least qualified, despite his lengthy resume as an assistant coach and coordinator for various teams, but never a head coach, which was kind of strange. Some other moves that the Cowboys made, they re-signed a receiver, Cavante Turman, one of their best special teamers on the team. They also re-signed defensive tackle Asa Odigizzawa. That's a very hard name to pronounce. And they also re-signed punter Brian Agner. So two of their key defensive defensive special teamers re-signed. And then they made a lot of trades this past offseason. They traded for corner Kaiir Elam, who was a bust for the Bills, but hopefully the Cowboys will manage to revive his career. They also traded for linebacker Kenneth Murray and a 7th-round pick from the Titans. They also interestingly traded for practice squad quarterback Joe Milton from the Patriots. Probably to use him in a backup role to replace Trey Lance. And then probably the biggest trade of them all for the Cowboys was getting receiver George Pickens and a 6th-round pick in 2 years from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and in return for 3rd and 5th-round picks in the next 2 years. And then going back to the offensive line, starting guard Zach Martin indeed announced his retirement. So yeah, a big void to fill if you were the Cowboys. But the more important thing was, getting that second receiver to go alongside CeeDee Lamb. And they got it with George Pickens, who did need a change of scenery. So looking at some of the moves that the Cowboys made in free agency, given that they didn't have a lot of money because most of it went to Dak Prescott, they lost a bunch of people. They did lose their quarterbacks, backup quarterbacks, but again, offset by the fact that Joe Milton was there already. And there weren't really many notable losses other than their edge rushers, losing Chauncey Golston, DeMarcus Lawrence, Carlos Watkins. But they didn't really add too many people of note either. The only people they did add was a couple running backs and Miles Sanders and Javonte Williams, and edge rushers Dante Fowler and Payne Turner. That's pretty much all they did. Yeah, very quiet offseason in free agency for the Cowboys. But they did their dirty work in the draft. They drafted a guard in Tyler Booker from Alabama in hopes of replacing Zach Martin. They also continued to address the trenches by adding edge rusher Donovan Eziraku from Boston College. And then they made a variety of picks, such as corner Siobhan Revel and running back Jaden Blue in hopes of finally getting their starting running back, linebacker Shamar James, and offensive lineman Johnny Cornelius. So when you look at this Cowboys offseason, one of my biggest takeaways is that defense. I feel like just like last offseason, they lost a ton of their key starters. Although it can be justified though, this both this year and last, that Jerry Jones wanted it to get younger, especially in the front four. But that said though, with that youth and inexperience among those draft picks, we'll have to, it'll be interesting how it turns out. It at least has upside though. But that being said, the veterans that are there, like Trayvon Diggs, Deron Bland, Micah Parsons, they're going to have their work cut out for them as they all return from injury. So these young studs, even with all that youth and inexperience and that potential upside, yeah, they're going to have to prove their worth. And then looking at the passing attack, at least on paper, it should look much better with George Pickens now able to assist CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. If he's able to turn around like two bad seasons where his production dipped with the Steelers, given that, well, the quarterback play was terrible. But now that he has a kind of somewhat better quarterback in Dak, I guess, hopefully this change of scenery will help him out and revive himself. So when you look at the Cowboys going into this upcoming season, your goal is to get back on track and challenge not just the Philadelphia Eagles, but you're also challenging the Commanders for the division. Because, yeah, those Commanders are up and rising, given what happened to them this past year. So looking at some of the key games for the Cowboys this upcoming season, your season starts in week 1, going up against Philadelphia in Philadelphia. And then in week 4, you take on the Green Bay Packers and Jordan Love. And then in week 7, you host the Washington Commanders and Jaden Daniels. And then you have the Thanksgiving game in week 13 against the Kansas City Chiefs. So pretty tough games in the next and spread out in those weeks. So yeah, the Cowboys will have to take advantage. So going into 2025, some things that raised my fancy, I guess. That new look offense. How's it going to look and fare for Dak Prescott? There are a few new but notable faces to help him out. But it's that scheme is what to look out for with new offensive coordinator Clayton Adams. Obviously, we know that Brian Schottenheimer is now the head coach and no longer the play caller for Dak. But now it's under Clayton Adams, who has had at least plenty of experience in various offensive coaching spots. But it'll remain to be seen how Dak is able to adjust to that. And then, obviously, we know about the running back position and whether or not will they be able to be a long-term solution. At least with Jaden Blue, he was a speedy threat at Texas, but didn't really emerge until his last collegiate season. He's been coming along at least, though, so far in this offseason. But let's see whether he can overtake Miles Sanders and Javonte Williams when it comes to actual game reps. But we'll find out in preseason. So Jerry Jones has at least made some decent moves this past offseason to put together a bounce back season, at least on paper. But his decision to make Brian Schottenheimer as a head coach is what's really going to make or break their season, especially in the division that's going to house two potential powerhouses as contenders in the Philadelphia Eagles and the Washington Commanders. So speaking of Washington, let's head to the nation's capital and talk about these cardiac Washington Commanders. And man, what a season they had last year. And honestly, I'm excited for them and what's to come this upcoming season. But let's rewind back. Let's rewind to last year and what was supposed to be a rebuild year with a new front office, a new head coach, and a new rookie quarterback. The Commanders, they turned the page, like 2 pages, probably even more. They fast forward, like light years ahead of that. They instead more than exceeded their expectations behind Jaden Daniels from LSU. He had a great rookie season that led the team to a surprising playoff run. It wasn't just a wild card upset. No, it was upsets over the Tampa Bay Bucks in the wild card, but also an upset over the top seeded Detroit Lions in the divisional. Now, unfortunately, their Cinderella run ended in the NFC Championship game against their division rival and eventual Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. But it's crazy how these Commanders that were supposed to be rebuilding, they managed to make it all the way there. Sure, like they didn't reach the Super Bowl. They fell 1 game short of that. But the Commanders surprised so many people. And now going into this upcoming season, they want to build upon from their shocking success from last year. Obviously, it's going to be harder, but they're going to be making steps towards that. So obviously, your goal for 2025 is to make it back to the playoffs and not just make the playoffs and repeat the success from last year, but to this time, try to win the NFC and make it to the Super Bowl. To do that, though, they had to address some needs for the things that went wrong last year. So some of those things include addressing that Charmin Ultra Sauce secondary, the one you use to wipe your ass with, because that unit last year was, I'd say, I wouldn't say necessarily worst, but it was it was one of the worst, actually. It was one of the worst in the NFL. And they really need to upgrade around good rookie corner Mike Sandstrill and mid-season acquisition Marshawn Lattimore, because outside of those two, they didn't really have any much else. And that really affected them late in the season and going into the playoffs. And even in despite the blowout upset over the Detroit Lions, they still had a little bit of difficulty with that game. They also need to add more help to the front seven because that run defense was a major weakness that got heavily exposed in the playoffs because they had no run stoppers besides Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, and Daron Payne. So they needed a little bit more rotational help because, even their front four wasn't enough. They also need to add some more help around Jaden Daniels because there wasn't much depth at receiver behind Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. And that got exposed at varying points last season. So they didn't have a number 2 for Jaden and not even a number 3. So they needed at least 2 more starting receivers for Jaden Daniels to really succeed. And Jaden's a very good rushing quarterback, but he also needed to have some pressure taken off of him. And that started by adding at least some backup help behind Brian Robinson Jr. So the Commanders made some interesting moves, to say the least, whether it was notable events, free agency, and the draft. And that all started with releasing one of their top defensive tackles in Jonathan Allen. I'm not sure why exactly they did that because the defense was one of their primary needs this past offseason. And Jonathan Allen signed with the Vikings. So I'm not sure why exactly they did that. Maybe it was a money issue or an age issue. Don't know. They also re-signed edge rusher Clinton Farrell and a bunch of other players such as Nick Bellore and Bobby Wagner. And then they re-signed their tight ends, Zach Ertz and John Bates. They made a couple of trades too, like trading for receiver Deebo Samuel from the 49ers. So they got him. They got Jaden Daniels, his second receiver at least. So let's see how Deebo does coming off, I say, at least 1 or 2 down years with my 49ers. And then they got Jaden Daniels some help on the offensive line in left tackle Laramie Tunzel in a 4th-round pick from the Texans. It was a very surprising move that the Texans made, but nonetheless, Daniels got the help he needs on the offensive line. So looking at some of the moves that happened for the Commanders in free agency, they didn't really lose too many people of note, like anyone of significance. But at the same time, they didn't really add anyone of note, other than defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw from the Jets, who I believe they pretty overpaid. So I'm not sure why exactly they did that. Looking at the draft is where they did their dirty work. I'd say that's where they made the biggest impact of moves. Getting an offensive lineman in Josh Connerly from Oregon, I'd say that was a really good move to help out Jane Daniels in that offensive line, as well as Laramie Tunzel. And they continued their work, getting corner Trey Amos, receiver Jalen Lane, linebacker Kane Medrano. Man, I'm terrible with names. So, yeah, I'd say the draft was where they did their best work. So, looking at this Commanders offseason, going into this season, I'd say the offensive line, as long as they stay healthy, should be way better than it was in the last couple of years. General Manager Adam Peters did what past Washington GMs refused to do, and that was give their quarterback ample protection in front of them, and quality ones at that. Sure, you can have plenty of offensive linemen, but you have to make sure that they're really good, or at least serviceable good offensive linemen. So Laramie Tunzel is one of the best left tackles in the NFL, and he's still pretty young at 30 years old. While drafting Connerly, he's pretty good. Good athleticism, good versatility, can play both positions at guard and tackle, and it'll greatly turn what once was a weakness for the Commanders into a strength. So that O-line of Tunzel, Allegretti, Blasdaz, Cosme, and Connerly, it's going to be great for Jay and Daniels, just as long as they stay healthy, and Jay and Daniels takes great advantage of that. So on the other side, though, the Commanders secondary, it has questions, though, but I think they made some decent additions, like corner Trey Amos. He's a really good lockdown corner that is quick to the point of tackling well. I'm not sure about free agent acquisition Jonathan Jones, but let's hope that he can do his role well. I say for now, he's a reserve with the chance to bounce back behind Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Sandstro. So looking at some of the key games for Washington this upcoming season as they try to fulfill their goal of going deeper and deeper into the playoffs. And that starts with week 2, going to Green Bay to take on the Packers. And then you go to week 4 in Atlanta to take on the Falcons. And then you go to week 7 and 8 to Dallas and Kansas City. A pretty tough slate in those back-to-back weeks. Yeah, a lot of road games I have on this list for the Commanders. So for the Washington Commanders this upcoming season, my concerns for them, sure, there were a lot of good things. There were a lot of good things for Washington on the offensive line. But for the defensive line, though, I kind of question a little bit about the front four because, yeah, I kind of wish they spent a little bit more because they had about $75 million to spend, but they used some of it on overpaying Javon Kinlaw, who I feel like didn't really do a lot, or at least was that productive to earn that big money. So I'm also not sure why they released Jonathan Allen, and they didn't use some of the other money that they had to at least get one more quality edge rusher. So they better hope that Frankie Louvu, Nick Bellore, and Dorrance Armstrong can hold the fort again because, yeah, that depth in the front four is going to be tested. And then for Jane Daniels, second-year quarterback this upcoming season, and a lot of quarterbacks in the last couple of years, like C.J. Stroud, Justin Herbert, Baker Mayfield, Mac Jones, and by extension, Jordan Love, they regress after doing well in their rookie year. But we'll see how Jane Daniels handles the second-year dreaded second-year quarterback year. But Jane Daniels has a better supporting cast around him, like at least on the offensive line. But it's going to be up to Jane Daniels to avoid what other quarterbacks before have suffered in their year two. And then last but not least, we look at Terry McLaurin. Scary Terry, because he's been trying to seek a contract extension all offseason long to the point where he hasn't even shown up to training camp yet because nothing is settled yet. He's still holding out. Not even sure why what kind of money he wants. And Noah Brown last month during mini camps suffered a serious injury. So yeah, the Commanders should really be concerned to a degree. Like Deebo Samuel is like their one top receiver that they have right now. So the Commanders and Terry McLaurin really got to come together, get this extension done. Otherwise, yeah, that receiver room is screwed. So Washington, they went further than anyone expected last season with going as far as the NFC title game to their belt, even though they came one game short of the Super Bowl. But now that was last season. This season, they're going to be really tested because teams are now going to have film on how to attack this team that's on the rise. And it's going to be a test for this team this year now that Jane Daniels is in his year two. But as long as Jane Daniels follows up with as good, if not even better campaign, the Commanders will remain a part of this playoff race and maybe make it even tight on the Eagles in the NFC East. So speaking of, we wrap up our NFC East preview and our overall 2025 NFL season team preview month with the team that won it all last year and rebounded from a horrific 2023 campaign. And that was the reigning, defending, undisputed Super Bowl 59 champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Philadelphia Eagles last year coming off a pretty bad Super Bowl losers curse riddled campaign in 2023. Yeah, they were looking to forget about all that, but it didn't exactly start off that way. They had to overcome that slow start full of offensive inconsistency and having to adapt to new coordinators, but they eventually turned things around to perform better and retake the NFC East for a playoff run in hopes of reaching back to the Super Bowl and avenge what happened 2 years prior. So they managed to make it back to the big game against a familiar foe in Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And yeah, they had to do exactly what they couldn't do 2 years prior. Now, this time, they not only went on to avenge their loss from 2 years prior, they went on to whoop the Chiefs' ass. And yeah, they whipped their ass, not just the Chiefs' ass, but pretty much everyone's asses. Whether it was Roger Goodell, Taylor Swift, the Swifties, everybody's asses in a practical handicap match. They overcame the odds. They finished their story, just like, the ending to WrestleMania 40. Yeah, they won the Super Bowl in convincing fashion to win their second Super Bowl title in franchise history at 14-3 in 2024. So this Eagles team is still pretty damn good. They draft pretty well. They get free agency done pretty well. So obviously your goal for 2025 for this Philadelphia Eagles squad and Philly fans is to, well, it's simple. Repeat as Super Bowl champions. Go back to back. So obviously for a team like this, despite how stacked they are, they still had some things to do because you have to find some replacements for your key defensive starters. Because you had people like Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, Zach Bond. They were very crucial pieces in that front seven in the Eagles turnaround after the bye week. Thing was, however, the Eagles just didn't have enough cap space to keep them all. And they had to choose one or two to keep them. So it was a very difficult decision for Howie Roseman to make. Which one was I going to keep going to next year? They also had to add some depth behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith because that was exposed greatly in that early season blowout loss in Tampa Bay. And even though throughout the season, the big three trio of Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith, they were having some consistency issues with each other. and even got into a few shouting matches with each other. Like at least with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, they were shouting at Jalen Hurts at a few points until the playoff run where they finally got together. So Howie Roseman could at least stand to add some reserves behind his top two receivers because, never hurts to add some help. So looking at some of the things that happened for the Eagles this past offseason, whether it was in free agency, the draft, or some other notable events, they had to promote their passing game coordinator, Kevin Patullo, to the new offensive coordinator because they lost Kellen Moore because he became the new head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Best of luck to him because he's definitely going to need it. So Jalen Hurts is going to have to again adjust to what will be his fourth offensive coordinator in 5 seasons that he's been in the NFL. Anyway, they also released center Nick Gates and corners James Bradbury and Darius Slay to clear up cap space. But at least they got a Super Bowl ring on the way out. They also re-signed a couple people like running back Saquon Barkley, left tackle Lane Johnson, center Cam Jurgens, defensive tackle Jordan Davis, and most importantly, linebacker Zach Bond. So again, they had to decide on which one to keep, and linebacker Zach Bond was the one to stay. Edge rusher Brandon Graham announced his retirement in mid-March, just before free agency. He had been with the team his whole 15-year career, and he did manage to win the 2 titles that Philadelphia won in the last 6 years, including the most recent one in Super Bowl 59. So he at least goes out on top as a champion. So the Eagles did make a couple of trades, trading away some of their players like Kenny Pickett to the Browns, their backup quarterback, trading away safety CJ Gardner-Johnson. So he's gone away again in the last 2 of 3 seasons. This time they traded him away to the Texans in return for at least it's a player for player and a draft pick for a draft pick kind of deal in return for guard Kenyon Green. And they also traded away edge rusher Bryce Huff to the 49ers. So looking at some of the moves that they made in free agency, they lost several key players, like right tackle Mekhi Becton to the Chargers, linebacker Oren Burks, and probably 2 of their biggest players in the defense. Edge rusher Josh Sweat, he went over to the Cardinals, from what I remember, and then defensive tackle Milton Williams went over to the Patriots. So yeah, they had to find big replacements in the draft. And then looking at some of their additions, not really too many people of note, but looking at some of them, they got linebacker Josh Ush from the Chiefs. And then to fulfill some of their reserve roles in the defense, corner Odori Jackson and linebacker Azeez Ojulari from the Giants. So the draft is where Howie Roseman really had to do his work. But to be honest with you, that's where he really does his best work at. So looking at the draft, they got linebacker Jihad Campbell from Alabama, safety Andrew Mukaba from Texas, defensive tackle Ty Robinson, corner Mac McWilliams, another linebacker in Shamail Mondon Jr. Mostly defensive players throughout. So I'd say the Eagles once again drafted very well to replace their free agency losses, add depth, and prepare for the future, because oftentimes Howie Roseman really likes to do that. But they're smart in doing that. They're really smart in scouting talent, that they came away filling in the blanks of the people that they lost, especially, getting hit hard, losing in the defensive line, and then some for down the line, especially in the offensive line, given that, you're not going to have Lane Johnson forever. And you gotta mentor somebody behind him when you eventually got to replace him whenever he retires, for example. So looking at some of the key games for the defending Super Bowl champions this upcoming season, you point towards week 1, the kickoff game against the Dallas Cowboys, an early divisional matchup. And I kind of like what the NFL did here early on. Week 2, you have this Super Bowl rematch right away, going to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. So you get that out of the way really early. So very smart move by the NFL. And then you come back home week 3 to take on the LA Rams. And then you go back on the road week 4 in Tampa to take on the Bucs. it's like a yearly tradition. It's like literally a yearly tradition that the Philadelphia Eagles have to go to Tampa to take on the Bucks in that hot ass weather. Like it's literally a freaking tradition at this point. Anyway, and then you got the very late key games very late in the year that could decide the division. Week 16 and 18 against the Commanders, and sandwiched in there, the Eagles have to go to Buffalo to take on Josh Allen and the Bills. So, as a defending Super Bowl champion, the Eagles have plenty of questions. One of those questions include Jalen Hurts and how he'll adjust to new offensive coordinator Kevin Patullo. This will be Hurts' fourth new offensive coordinator in his whole tenure, going from Press Taylor to Shane Steichen to Brian Johnson to Kellen Moore and now to Patullo. So Jalen Hurts, he struggled with Press Taylor, although he didn't really start until late in his rookie year because Carson Wentz did such, and then he did well under Shane Steichen and Kellen Moore. But now Patullo has been around since Nick Sirianni was first hired in 2021. But whether he keeps the same scheme, makes new changes of his own to implement whatever he wants to, that remains to be seen. So it's you got to keep an eye on if you're an Eagles fan, what exactly Jalen Hurts is going to do under Patullo. So keep an eye out for that. And then obviously as a defending Super Bowl champion, there's always going to be that target on your back. And of course, how you're going to follow up on quote unquote finishing the story in the NFL. Yeah. Can the Eagles avoid that post Super Bowl hangover, that Super Bowl victory hangover? The last time the Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2018, they experienced a regression year. Now for Philadelphia this year, you can't have that. This team is too stacked to go on, regress, get too cocky and all that and such and such. This team is better built to defend their title. But as the old saying goes, anything can happen in the NFL. So the Eagles have to be careful not to have a letdown this upcoming season. So Philadelphia entering this upcoming season as the class of the NFC and one of the best the NFL has to offer. They got a very loaded roster, one of the best offensive lines if not the best offensive line in the NFL. Very strong defense, even though they had a string of losses this past offseason. And overall, you're looking at a team, both short-term and long-term, very, very strong team. They have a really good shot to go on a deep playoff run once again. And as long as things line up for them, they have a really good shot too at repeating as Super Bowl champions. But like I said, anything can happen in the NFL. And like I said earlier, they also have the possibility of having a letdown follow-up season after winning the Super Bowl. So like I said, the Eagles have to be very careful if they want their repeat Super Bowl championship dreams to stay alive and not have a letdown season. So that is a wrap on our 2025 NFL season team preview month and this finale of said team preview month. And as we looked at the four teams in the NFC East to put a bow on things. Those teams were the New York Giants, the Dallas Cowboys, the Washington Commanders, and your reigning, defending, undisputed Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. So, with all that being said, let me know your opinions on all four of these NFC East teams, whether it's in the comments on YouTube or send me a message on social media at Very Cold Lasagna, wherever I'm at. And just overall, who's your team? Who is the team you're going with this upcoming season? What are your hot takes? What are your opinions going into the upcoming 2025 season for any team in the NFL? Whether you're a casual, a hardcore analyst, you name it. I love to hear your thoughts as we're closing in. We are closing in hard on the upcoming 2025 NFL season. And can't wait for it. another season on the way, and I really can't wait for it. Football is almost finally back. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast. I have been your host, Dylan Lasagna. Thank you for tuning into this episode number 279 of this icy yet spicy podcast. And keep the lasagna very cold in the fridge with said filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And I'm not sure what we're going to... Oh, yeah. SummerSlam is around the corner. That 2-night SummerSlam. Man, can't believe it's still going to be 2 nights. Yeah, sad. I might check it out. Might review it. But you'll just have to tune in and find out. But yeah, until then, until the next episode, whenever that happens, thank you for tuning into our month-long 2025 NFL season team preview month. But until the next episode, when I see you in the next one, peace out.